big battle about that, about which backing track to use. There were 2 different drum tracks, and there was a huge battle about that, and eventually there was a compromise was arrived at where one backing track went for 2 verses and then another, so that was really nothing much.
It was almost it was the last time that lineup almost was together. They did an album after that called The Final Cut, which I think Rogers was on, but I'm not sure whether he toured with them when they did it. I think he might have dropped out by then. But it was very much its swan song. I mean, the thing was sort of corroding, really. Because
the acrimony between the Pink Floyd members, which nobody really knew too much about when the album was being put together, because that is now part of public domain, and because all the court battles between Roger and the other 3, you know, are very well known. I think Roger has got this image now of being, this slightly irksome geezer.
I was never quite sure about Roger, because I've been warned not to take it seriously if Roger got on one, you know. He was volatile, and he certainly did shout at people, you know. But he never really voiced any criticism of me at all, and we talked quite comfortably. There was one time, I think it was on the afternoon run-through in Dortmund, I'd never played a place that big, you know, not really, and I was using their amps, not mine. I don't remember sort of turning the amp up and taking a solo. I remember Roger coming over and saying, Andy, we're trying to entertain them, not kill them. It's like, turn it down, you know. But I thought, heck, I've got this huge amp, I shall turn it up, you know, I mean, it's rock and roll. But that's not how they work, because it all goes through the PA. It's not, you know, Black Sabbath or Motorhead, you know what I mean? I mean, they don't play like that.
When I came to the Wall, it was already a hugely successful record and an enormous show. But right from the outset, it was our intention absolutely not to make a concert movie. I mean, I could have put 6 cameras on the concert and ended up with an acceptable film. But we wanted it to be totally cinematic, a film in its own right.
Alan Parker was going to shoot a concert movie, and there were going to be dramatic highlights cut in with the story that became ultimately the story of the entire movie, the thing with Geldof and, you know, the no eyebrows character, and Pink, you know, who was just a big rag doll in our show. And then they just jettisoned the notion of the concert at all. But they filmed every night at Earl's Court for 5 nights, multi-camera shoot. I mean, people everywhere.
Well, some people have called The Wall, the movie, which came out in 1982, directed by Alan Parker, one huge clip. In other words, lots of repetition and not really focused as a movie. Difficult task, though, to grab an idea like The Wall and turn it into a big visual entity.
Roger just isn't the writer in the normal sense. He's not only just he's written a screenplay, it is based on his life. And of course, the original inspiration is the music. It's our main narrative energy, and it was the beginnings of everything that we aspired to do because it was the original work of art.
Very difficult to translate rock ideas into movies. How strong is the original idea? A film tends to expose weaknesses in a storyline, for example.
If we are to define what The Wall is, whether it has a narrative or whether it is glorified music video, we could then argue that it's probably both.
It's about a rock and roll star in a hotel room reviewing his past life and all the people who've hurt him. And he sits there and goes gradually crazy.
Well, I think in a way it was a good idea to get Bob Geldof to play Pink in the film. I mean, who else could they have got? Somebody else would have been too recognisable. A Mick Jagger or a David Bowie would have been, well, it's Mick Jagger or David Bowie. Hard for them to play somebody else. But Geldof wasn't quite such an iconic star in that sense.
The great thing about Geldof is he wasn't a Pink Floyd fan, so you know, you didn't have that sort of reverential treatment that you would have got with somebody who was heavily into that band's music.
He was asked if he wanted to do it, and he said, no, I can't stand Pink Floyd. I think the album's rubbish, and I don't want anything to do with it at all. but his manager managed to persuade him. I know this story to be true because they discussed it in a cab on the way to an airport when they were going to do some gigs with the Boomtown Rats in Europe. And Bob was ranting and raving about how awful he thought the Wall was and everything else. And the reason I know this was because the cab driver was my brother.
I think that Bob Geldof does a reasonably good job in The Wall. Part of that reason is that he's not saying many lines. There is almost non-existent dialogue in that film, and what he does appropriately.
This is a ticket from the premiere of the film, and that was one of the images that they reproduced. This was the character that Bob Geldof played, who was called Pink. He was a pop star that went crazy. And my overwhelming feeling really was of disappointment. I hoped it was going to be a concert movie, and I didn't really know that it wasn't until I went to see the film. And the other thing was that I thought it was a shame that they didn't make more of the music. They used the album, just remixed bits of the album, rather than actually approach it again from scratch.
The score of The Wall suffers because of its strong song structure, and it appears to be multi-layering on the top of already strong concept and narrative, together with the visuals and animation, and oversaturating the space, which makes it much more difficult for a viewer and listener to identify with the piece.
One day Roger Waters rang me up and said that he was writing a new piece. His idea was that we should make a film of it at that point, and it immediately interested me. I started work there and then on one of the pieces from the album called The Trial, and working on it has brought out a whole area of my work that was unexplored.
The Trial, I don't think, would have worked without Gerald Scarfe's manic visions. I mean, that is really just the culmination of all his craziness in one bonkers melting pot.
Good morning, worm, your honour. The crown will plainly show the prisoner who now stands before you was caught red-handed, showing feeling.
This is a really interesting song. Musically, it's immensely complex, and it's played by an orchestra. It's essentially in 2/4, so that means 2 crotchets to the bar. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and that style 1, 2, 2 crotchets, 2/4 can sometimes be quite menacing. So that's the first thing. And what's going on top, musically, is deliberately discordant in places to create angst, to create tension. So for instance, while this is going on, you've also got an F chord against it. You've got an F sharp chord against it. There's huge tension there. You've got a G against it. Even more tension. But it's not necessarily played in the order I've just played it as well. So you'll get and consequently creating even more tension.
The Scarfe's animation for The Wall could exist on its own. It succeeds on its own right. Whether it sits well with the rest of a narrative and a film imagery, that's a different question. And it often appears, if you ask audiences what do they remember from The Wall, then Scarfe's animation and music are first 2 answers that you will get.
The song is, I would say, also in more of a show-style song, or vaudeville, or a film noir, a musical, but a dark musical. And it's really, really, it's a clever piece of music.
Suffer your exquisite white mother fills me with...
What Scarfe did was interpret the images so well with the music that you know, one without the other is much, much weaker.
I sentence you to be exposed before your peers! Tear down the wall!
When the Pink, the character played by Bob Geldof, finally put himself on trial, he realizes that himself, as the creator of the wall, is the part of a problem as well. Blaming the rest of the world, that of his father in a war, his overprotective mother, his audience, everybody but himself, his betraying wife, was something that created the wall and finally made this total and final division between him, reality, and the rest of the world. And he finally decides to break it down.